Thank you, Senator Katter. Senator Whish-Wilson.
Thank you, Acting Deputy President. I stand to talk tonight about the Migration and Maritime Powers Legislation Amendment, and it's with a heavy heart that I'm doing this in the last night of Parliament for 2014. I'm looking forward to getting home to my home state of Tasmania and spending time with my children and my family, and enjoying the good life that so many Australians enjoy, spending time with our loved ones over Christmas. And I'll certainly be reminding myself of what a lucky country we live in. And I think sometimes we forget that it's not like that in the rest of the world. And unless you've been overseas and experienced life in other places, and you've met people who've fled these other places. I grew up, for example, not working, but socialising through our church group with Vietnamese refugees during the mid-1970s. They were a common part of my Sunday. We used to call them spring roll Sundays. Families would get together and we would spend time with them. And I think now about the sort of society that my children are going to live in and the message that's coming out of this government about other human beings. And I think we need to get this right back to the building blocks and just wash away all the spin and all the nonsense and all the messaging around this debate. Essentially, we're dealing with human beings. We're dealing with human beings. I'll get to the drownings for your benefit, Senator O'Sullivan, through you, Chair, very, very shortly. But we're dealing with human beings. Every human being has human rights. We should all have the same human rights. It's a fundamental concept that I think we all understand in here. Yet the reason that I'm standing here and debating this on the last night of Parliament, on a Thursday night, rather than being on a plane heading home, is because of politics. It's not because Senator O'Sullivan's side of the chamber is trying to save lives at sea. We're here because this government desperately needs a win. In the last remaining hours and minutes of Parliament, when that bell rings and we go home, it wants to say that it's controlled the agenda and that it has focused on an area that it believes it's strong on and has delivered on, and it wants to show the Australian people just how big and tough and in control it is. And considering, I've heard several times from the Prime Minister and from Minister Morrison this week that the big achievement of this government this year is that they have stopped the boats. Not that we would know because it's top secret, but let's take their word for it. They've stopped the boats. Why are we here as a matter of urgency trying to pass this legislation, this fundamentally flawed legislation that the majority of human rights experts in this country condemn? It's an extraordinary bill, even for this government and their record of cruelty on refugees and asylum seekers. It's an extraordinary bill, and there's no hurry for this. This is all about trying to get a good headline and appearing to be strong and in control, because this government is in disarray. It is ending the year having been thoroughly spanked in this chamber and in the opinion polls and by the Australian people. And it makes me sad that it believes that a race to the bottom on cruelty is somehow something they should be waving a flag on, saying how great they are and look at what we've achieved. I've talked about language that we use as leaders in Parliament before on issues relating to war and terrorism. I've talked about the role of the media in these types of debates, and it's no different here. It really disgusts me. It really disgusts me. And I know Senator Cash has probably got a good heart, but it's her job to stand up in the chamber during question time and talk about the government's message and use certain language. But it really disgusts me that we have coined what is humanitarian assistance in military terms. Even the word operation. Operation Sovereign Borders. Protecting our borders. Protecting our borders from what? From the most unfortunate and desperate people in the world. Last time I checked, they weren't coming here to seize our national assets. They weren't carrying guns or explosives. This is set up because this government, this cruel Conservative government, knows it's good politics, and it has been good politics in the past, to demonise, dehumanise and marginalise other human beings. And in an attempt to appear more reasonable, the argument goes that it's all about people smugglers. It's all about the people smugglers. But in the attempt to bridge and push that frame into the minds of Australians through the media and through this parliament, they forget that they're doing a lot of damage, not just to the people that they're locking up in prison islands, but also to migrant communities here in Australia. And the Greens have consistently offered alternative solutions. We've consistently offered alternative solutions. And I want to talk in a minute about a project in my home state of Tasmania, which a number of church groups have come together to lead on as an alternative solution to cruel offshore processing, turning back boats and temporary protection visas. Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, the procedures set out in this bill actually clearly point to this Australian government seeking to limit the number of people who are found to be genuine refugees, thereby limiting the onus on Australia to meet its fair share of responsibility for dealing humanely with those seeking asylum from persecution and violence. The unfairness in the system is obvious to anyone who has ever worked with refugees, and this is the position of strength that the Greens have always had in our policy, and through Senator Hanson-Young, through all the work she's done, our position is firmly embedded in that of stakeholders in this country who work with refugees. We've always worked with stakeholders in the formulation of our policies and our ideas around refugees. Many of these who have provided written submissions to the Senate inquiry, which I'll touch on in a minute, many of these have pointed out things such as people fleeing countries where government institutions are weak or predatory are understandably initially fearful of Australian officials. Asylum seekers are often traumatised by their experiences and are unable to put the whole of their claims into a logical or coherent narrative. And I've met a number of them in Tasmania at the Pontville Detention Centre. Heartbreaking stories from young men who have fled persecution. They do not understand what is important and what is incidental in recounting their stories. It takes some time before they feel safe. When sexual violence is also involved, it can be many months or even years before an asylum seeker feels enough trust to be able to divulge the nature of their suffering. It's also important to note that even this substandard form of review will be off limits to certain categories of asylum seekers who arrive by sea. For example, those who the minister decides to exclude based on his or her opinion that their claim is manifestly unfounded. This effectively renders the minister judge and jury in a decision that could cost the person their life, their family and their future. Now, I don't know about others in this chamber or how Australians are feeling about it, but from what I've seen of Minister Morrison, he's not the sort of person I would want in a position where compassion and empathy and understanding is required in dealing with human beings who have universal or should have universal human rights. When taken together, the Australian Human Rights Commission has warned that these changes will significantly reduce the rights of asylum seekers travelling to or arriving in Australia, increase the risk that they will be wrongly found not to be refugees, and increase the risk that they will be returned to a place where they have a well-founded fear of persecution because of a lack of judicial oversight of relevant decisions. These changes are also unlikely to lead to the type of efficiency gains, which I've heard senators in the chamber talk about this week from the coalition, that the government coldly hopes for, particularly if protection applicants continue to be denied access to legal advice. As the Law Council of Australia has pointed out, the lack of access to legal advice at the initial stage, coupled with the removal or restriction of merits review, are likely to lead to more applications to the High Court based on common law judicial review principles. This will undoubtedly lead to further inefficiencies and prolong the process of determining Australia's protection obligations. The bill also seeks to amend the Maritime Powers Act 2013 to remove judicial scrutiny of whether Australia complies with certain human rights obligations. And on it goes. So the debate that was in the media today, that was focused on in the Senate today, was about temporary protection visas. That's one of 7 schedules. That's being used politically as a Trojan horse. As a Trojan horse to ram through this parliament tonight with no real urgency except for headlines and for political gain, a whole series of manifestly unjust, unethical and dangerous provisions that have been so well summarised in the Senate inquiry into the Migration and Maritime Powers legislation amendment. We heard from thousands of human rights lawyers, refugee advocates, academics and community members, all of whom rejected the amendments proposed in this bill, despite the overwhelming evidence from experts in the community who have said this bill should not proceed. The majority report had recommended that the bill be passed. This committee has arrogantly rejected the evidence of thousands of Australians and has chosen to favour politics and punishment over protection and the rule of law. I don't know how many times unfortunately sometimes I'm not paying enough attention during question time, but I don't know how many times I've had to stand up and ask Senator Cash to retract her statements that it's illegal. There are illegal entrants into this country. They are not. Under international law, it is not illegal to seek asylum. It is not illegal to seek asylum. This bill is by far one of the most regressive pieces of legislation this Parliament has seen when it comes to the treatment of asylum seekers and refugees. There is no doubt that this bill is an attempt by the government to dramatically reduce the number of refugees Australia takes each year and to legitimise their actions at sea when intercepting and turning back asylum seeker boats. It seeks to legalise the government's actions at sea, limit parliamentary and judicial oversight, disregard Australia's international and human rights obligations, and we are becoming a global embarrassment, reintroduce temporary protection visas for boat arrivals, introduce a new temporary protection visa called a special humanitarian enterprise visa, introduce rapid processing with the sole aim of reducing the number of people Australia finds to be in need of protection, remove the Refugee Convention from the statute books and deem babies born to asylum seekers' parents as unauthorised maritime arrival. This bill is an attack on Australia's generous heart and our whole concept of fair and equitable treatment, and will result in Australia wrongly refusing protection to genuine refugees and returning them to persecution or significant harm. We don't know how many genuine refugees we've turned away when we've safely towed back the boats. We have no idea how many of them, how they're hurting, what kind of lives that they've fled from, and we've denied them the right, as have so many of our predecessors in generations before us who have fled persecution and come to this country and built themselves a better life. And not just built themselves and their families a better life, but built a better country. Built a better country. And why all this is happening, why we're having this radical deviation from Australia's long-standing commitment to international and human rights law, why we're seriously endangering the lives of thousands of asylum seekers, and why you can say you've saved them from drowning, you have no idea what they're going back to or how long they're going to survive in the places that they're going to have to flee to. You could laugh, Senator O'Sullivan. It's not a good look. Good. I hope that's through you, Deputy Chair. I hope that's the case.
Order.
The Australian Greens strongly recommend that this bill be rejected by the Senate. We are better. We are better than this. This is not about saving lives at sea. This may be about saving money because efficiency dividends are so important to this government. This is about politics. This is about trying to get a win in this chamber before we go home for Christmas. Because this government is under pressure. It is in disarray. Even the Murdoch press has turned on it in recent weeks. And it knows it's got 6 to 8 weeks before Parliament comes back, and it desperately needs a win. It desperately needs a win. And once again, it is sad. It is sad. It really, genuinely is sad that the coalition government feels that it can get a win on being more cruel to people every time it tries to introduce a new piece of legislation. And I just wanted to finish on this concept of empathy. If you saw the documentary, Go Back to Where You Came From, it was pretty hard not to feel empathy for people who were fleeing persecution. It was pretty hard not to. But without that empathy, there's no understanding. And, of course, there's no compassion without empathy. Any one of us, if any one of us here tonight goes home, stares at the ceiling before they close their eyes and imagine what it would be like to be in these people's shoes. If you can imagine it, we probably couldn't, to be honest, because we've never seen our children shot in the head. We've never seen some of the awful... Senator O'Sullivan, these are eyewitness... This is what I have been told. And it's well documented, some of the atrocities these people are fleeing from. Often in war zones, areas of famine, disease. All they want to do is get a better life. A young man who gets put on a bus at 2 a.m. by his dad, and his uncle spirits him away somewhere, and then before he knows it, he's on more buses, then he's on a boat. He doesn't know where he's going or why, but his family want a better life for him, or they don't want him killed. These are the kind of people that we are safely towing back at sea, safely sending them back into the blue yonder. Goodbye. What are we afraid of in this country? What are we actually protecting our borders from? That's the question at the heart of this debate. Why does the coalition, going all the way back to Prime Minister John Howard in Tampa, why does this government see it as good politics to be cruel and dehumanise and marginalise other human beings? And that's something that I'm still struggling with, why there are people in my country who are so fearful of people arriving, desperate people arriving by boat. And the only conclusion I can come to is that that fear is deeply seated for a number of reasons. But I sometimes wonder whether it's just the fact that we fear for our quality of life. Because we have such a good one in this country. We are so lucky. Of course, there are people who are doing it tougher than others. There are people doing it tough here. But compared to the poor souls risking their lives for a better life, I actually think we do pretty well here. And we do pretty well to remember. We do pretty well to remember how fortunate we are. And that's why I've been very pleased to be working with a group of Tasmanians, church groups set up originally, but a number of people have joined them to look at the Tasmanian opportunity to offer an alternative to offshore processing in Tasmania, using the facilities that are there, using the community to resettle refugees, taking a compassionate approach that will cost a fraction of what Senator Cash, his department, is spending on her so-called military operation, protecting this country from the world's most unfortunate people. And we can do it through our communities in a positive and inclusive way. There is another way. We've got to build the politics. It's our job in the Greens and hopefully in Labor and other progressive parties to build support for that kind of initiative in the Australian community. That's our job, to let Australians know there's nothing to be fearful of. This is a normal part of Australia's heritage, and it's got a very positive future if we can come together and put aside the politics of fear, Senator O'Sullivan, and have a Merry Christmas.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
the time with your family.
Thank you, Senator Whish-Wilson.